Welcome to the Greenwich Peninsula. Behind me stands the Design District. It's a collection of 16 buildings focused on workspaces for the creative industries. It's designed by 8 architects and a single landscape designer. We have tenants currently moving in and should be fully occupied by the end of this year. When we worked on the Allies and Morrison master plan in 2015, and there was a sort of recalibration of the wider master plan on the peninsula, we wanted to shift the emphasis of obviously to residential, but with a very strong concept in terms of employment. And on the peninsula we already had obviously the O2, so we had creative industries in terms of music and performance were here. We had Ravensbourne Art College with 2,000 graduates coming out of the college every year. And in the original master plan we had an idea for a film studio. And we saw the Design District as sitting right at the heart of those things, drawing them together to drive the employment use on the site. Obviously, the film studios are being backed elsewhere in East London now, and we brought this forward 5 years ago now, as really as a way to sort of bring greater interest to the heart of the peninsula, to provide that daytime activation and that employment use. And I think for us, the move at the time was that we were seeing lots of initiatives that were helping the creative industries, but often they were temporary. So the idea that they would come into a building, activate it, make it interesting, but then as the building was redeveloped, they might be moved on. So the whole district is permanent. And I think that for us was a very bold move, but showed the intent in terms of wanting to attract the creative industries here, give them support in terms of the rents and how we sort of manage that place, and also that we're building a piece of city. I'm hoping that it just becomes a natural part of the peninsula and it's embedded within the wider place as it evolves. Here we are standing in Selgus Cano's Canteen building, and we're on this sort of upper mezzanine level, which is once you've been down at ground and you bought yourself a drink or a bit of food, you can come up and sit on the mezzanine level here. The structure is a sort of mixture of polycarbonate at low level and then wrapped in this stretched ETFE. And in fact, a lot of the sort of the roof panels open up to the elements, so we can get a lot of cross ventilation through here. And in good weather, you can enjoy the sunshine coming in. This is our most public facing building in the sense that it's open to all visitors on the peninsula. If you're coming to a gig at the O2, we hope that you'll come here and have a drink and some food before a concert. Obviously, we hope this is a place our tenants come and hang out, as well as residents who live here. This is designed by Selgus Cano, who are also designing one of the workspace buildings. They're a fantastic practice. We probably know them best here for a Serpentine Pavilion that they did a few years ago, as well as Second Home. They always bring a lot of sort of pop and colour and fun. So for us, this is a really exuberant building that sits at the heart of the Design District. In the brief that we had with Schultzer and Grassoff, our landscape designers from Copenhagen, was that could we paint a canoe in the courtyard and could people make a mess? So it is very much intended that that's what happens in these spaces. Also, it was important that people could meander and wander through, so that there's at each corner there's a little alleyway that comes into this courtyard, and that's part of the wider master plan. So that I think in some instances we're down to 3 metres, which are proximities that are really hard to get in new build. But what it does mean is that it's an environment where you can turn a corner and make a new discovery. So if you walk into this courtyard from the main square, you suddenly come into this fantastic back facade by David Conn Architects in sort of bright green grid on the red brick. Opposite this building by 6A Architects, where they've got a terrazzo facade, but with these over-embellished bits of sort of the utilities of the building, which they've really expressed, in terms of the canopy in bright pink that signifies the entrance. The concrete building at the end is Adam Khan, and that is the whole building is poured in situ. So both the walls and the floors are all cast in situ, and you can see at the base there's articulation from the shuttering and a little bit of sort of chamfering to the windows. All of that was done through the shuttering of the pour.
So how many people will be working here?
1,800 creatives. The likelihood is that we'll have a little bit more than that, because the building that's to our right here This is Ravensbourne Art College. They were our first tenants. They've put their postgraduate and business incubator here, and I think that will have a few more numbers than we'd anticipated. And we've also created a sort of membership club for the creative industries, which is across 2 buildings, and I think we'll have a higher number of tenants. So that's a sort of mix of co-working, service studios, meeting space and lounge space for them. So I think that'll up our numbers to about 2,000. The idea was that all the buildings would be very adaptable to have a sort of mix of tenancies. So we have some buildings where we have a single tenant, like Ravensbourne. We have others where we've created smaller studio spaces. I think 200 square foot is the smallest, up to 1,000, or then even up to a whole floor plate and a whole building. And that gives us a variety of tenancies. And that means that we have tenants who've signed up who are from a whole different range of creative industries. We have ceramicists, we have music PR, we have a leather maker, we have a shoe designer, we have LGBTQ plus art space, we have a dance company that's taken 2 floors. So we've really got a very broad spectrum, and the idea was that we'd create a bit of an ecosystem here. And the reason really for trying to create a neighbourhood rather than a collection of a couple of buildings we could break up into smaller spaces was that we'd have that synergy across a whole urban environment where people could exchange ideas, also could find the building that they preferred, and we felt that that was the right approach to attract the people that we wanted to be here. Whereas if we'd just done a couple of sort of big sheds and carved them up as cheap space, that might not have had the same appeal in terms of bringing tenants to the peninsula.
But if you're a ceramicist, you pay less rent than if you're a tech company?
Yes, so the idea when we started out the appraisal was that we had a blended rate of £25 a square foot, and that is across the district as a whole. But what that allowed us to do is sort of push the rents up and down. So you're right in that some tenants pay less than others. I think our lowest rent is £7 a square foot, and others will pay over the 25 to compensate, and that's made very clear to the tenants who join. They understand that there needs to be that cross subsidy and that you're allowing some tenants coming in who might not be able to afford it. And then in terms of addressing, I guess, the difficulties that the industries have faced post-COVID is that the first 12 months are £5 a square foot for all the tenants across the board. This project was rather unique in the way that we set about running the design process. We originally worked with HNNA architects on revising the master plan, or really doing a further detailed study of the master plan that Allies and Morrison had done in 2015. So this sits within the wider context of the master plan of the whole peninsula. So alongside the work that we did with HNNA, we then started to develop a series of briefs for the buildings, which was that we could have workshop space at ground floor, and then the levels above would be more open plan and adaptable. But within that, we needed everything to be focused on a low rent for tenants. So we set a maximum rent across the whole district as a blended rate of £25 a square foot, and then worked back from that. Now, once we'd set the master plan up, each architect's got a pair of buildings, never next to each other, and they got a target NIA and a target construction budget, and they had to stick to that. That was sort of rigid, and actually within that, otherwise, they were free to do what they wanted. They had maximum parameters in terms of the height, width and depth of their plots, but after that they had really no design guidelines. They were allowed to the idea was that they would express themselves, do their own thing, and actually a really key part of the design process was that in that first phase, that first couple of months, we asked them to design blind. So not to be aware of what their neighbour was doing, and really just to focus on their own plot and not speak to each other. And the idea behind that was that I think if you asked a lot of people what their favourite part of London was, they're usually unlikely to say a place that's new, a new build. They're more likely maybe to pick a part of Clerkenwell or Soho or Southwark. And what we wanted to try and do in this process was create what we sort of call a bit of wit and mess. And that usually happens over time. A place evolves and buildings might get knocked down, or they might get bashed about, or you have a sort of a language of place that happens over a longer period. And so because we were doing this all from scratch, we wanted to create a process whereby we would have that mix and diversity that you might find in a more established neighbourhood, but from the off. That building is CLT, designed by Mole Architects. Both their buildings are CLT. We have a range of construction across the site, so all the buildings are BREEAM Excellent. but we have a mixture of CLT, concrete frame and steel frame as well. And although all the architects had a very different response, where we could, we tried to find sort of some commonalities. So there's a lot of sanitary ware that's repeated across all the buildings. They all have the same lift, and where we could find some of those efficiencies within procurement, we tried. I think we probably expected there to be more than there were, but given all the architects had such a very different approach, we've ended up with pretty singular buildings. This one straight ahead is a building by HNNA Architects, and it's part of the offer that we're calling the Bureau. And so this is our sort of co-working club offer for the creative industries. And so at ground floor we have a lounge space and we have a restaurant which tenants can use, and it's open to the wider tenants across the district. And we found that people who are taking a studio space are also taking membership within the club as well, so they can use the meeting rooms, they can entertain clients. And we have a range of offers where you can have a fixed desk that you come to every week. You have service studios which maybe have 3 or 4 people working within them, and then we just have a hot desk so you can just come in, find a spot and set up camp for the day. And I think the cheapest is £80 a month for a lounge membership. I think it's 120 for hot desking. We had a range of architects that we'd wanted to work with for a long time, and I think the approach on the peninsula is often we keep those conversations going with the industry, but we wait for the right project to come along and hopefully pair the right project with the right architect that we feel. So in fact, we were really fortunate. These are the first 8 architects that we had on the list that we asked, all said yes straight away. And that was great. I think the one thing which is also really important is that we had a landscape architect as part of that team. So we had 8 architects, but 1 landscape architect, and there's Schulze plus Grashoff from Copenhagen. And the idea was that you could have that diversity across the buildings, but a unifying ground floor plane that would help give some commonality to the district. So I think you do feel aware that the landscape changes a little bit as you set foot into the district, but I think it's important that even in all the courtyards, while there's a lot of variety, it still feels like it's a singular place. And I think that's often something that you find quite a lot across, I guess, grander estates across London, but you know when you're walking onto the Grosvenor estates, and you sort of get that sense. So there are some really simple touches here that not just using a lot of core 10 within the sort of the drainage and some of the kind of fixtures, but also the manhole covers. And some of the architects picked to do exact pairs of buildings, and others have taken a slightly different approach and done something different. You can see that the 6A buildings both have this sort of harlequin patterns, terrazzo, one in green and one in red. And we were careful to ensure that none of the buildings were next to each other that the architects are working on, but that you do get a view. You can always, hopefully, get a reference point where you can see the two. And we wanted a mix and diversity of architecture, but also just to have some commonality. And we thought that if it had been 16 completely different buildings, that might have been a bit too much. So we're standing here on top of the basketball court of building C1 in the design district by Architecture 00. You can see behind me there's a pretty incredible view, probably one of the more unique views that you might get from a basketball court in London. And what's below us are a series of workshops and creative spaces for the creative industries. Actually, we've got tenants in this building, ranging from a landscape architecture practice to a shoe designer, who I think recently had a whole load of shoes on at the Design Museum exhibition. This is quite a unique building in that through the design process we moved all the circulation space from inside the building to the outside, and that allowed us to free up the internal area, both to be better for revenue, but also to be more efficient in terms of breaking those studio spaces up. It means that all the things like the loos, the kitchens, they're all accessed from outside, but it means that the staircase, which wraps up the side of one building, allows the public to get up here, get up onto the basketball court without having to go into the building. And then the whole piece is wrapped in this metal mesh that you see, which gives it this very kind of utilitarian I guess, sort of aesthetic, very much in keeping with this idea of the creative industries and making and craft that we have here. What's exciting for me, even though I trained as an architect before I moved client side, is that we've had a huge amount of freedom in terms of what we've been able to do from a design side. I think we gave freedom to the architects in terms of developing their aesthetic within our brief. I think we were able to be extremely adventurous and playful within the master planning, and I think obviously the fact that it is all workspace with no residential allows us to get sort of proximities and between buildings which you might not be able to do with residential. But I think for me, the reaction that people have when they come is usually one that ignites a smile and the will to sort of the sense that they want to go and explore and see what's around the corner, and that's what we hoped would happen. And so I think, yes, there is a sort of sense, a little bit of a sense that there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of buildings which are kind of clashing, but for me it's quite a unique opportunity that we had, and I don't think we've seen a project like it in London. So we're currently, I think, about 60-65% let, which I think really shows the appetite for people to get back into the workplace, and I think that's also in part because of the quality of the spaces. I think what's brilliant about the spaces is that they all have great views. They're all built to a very high standard in terms of being well insulated, being comfortable, being warm, unlike a kind of drafty warehouse space. And I think the appetite of being next to lots of other people, finding new neighbours, making new connections. So I think for us, the fact that we're seeing the appetite for people to get back out there and be part of the city is really exciting.